Hello, everyone. You are now live on YouTube.
Great. Thank you, Pat.
Good evening to everyone joining us online here. So I have a couple minutes till 6 o'clock and we'll get this meeting kicked off. Um, just a few more minutes to let anyone else start filtering in. Appreciate you being here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third workshop on Montana River Recreation Management, guiding future management of the resource and the experience. Tonight's workshop will be recorded and be available on the River Recreation Advisory Council webpage. My name is Liam Harry. I am a Parks and Outdoor Recreation Planner for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. This evening, I am joined by some other staff as well, which we'll be hearing from three of our recreation managers this evening is Colin Moss, Cannon Colgrove, and Chrissy O'Shell. I'm also joined by Deb O'Neill, our acting administrator for Parks and Outdoor Recreation, and Amber Lopatine, my sidekick in Parks and Outdoor Recreation, as a recreation planner. So I'll go ahead and kind of get started here with what our agenda will look like this evening. As I mentioned, this is our third workshop of three. We had two last week, and this is our final workshop. To start our meeting off, we've got our staff introductions, as I just had done. We'll dive a little bit into the process design and the public engagement of this entirety of this process. We'll take a quick look into what the legislative and regulatory framework is that we work with here at Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. A little bit into the background of river recreation management, a little bit of the history, and then into some of how we manage today, what resources, what methods we use today to manage some of the rivers across the state. We'll have some examples of that as well. We'll dive a little bit into the Smith, the Blackfoot, as well as the Missouri, with some examples on how those are managed. And then we'll spend majority of this meeting this evening in this workshop soliciting some of your input, your public input, have some thorough discussions around these discussion questions. We'll be using a software called Mentimeter that will allow us to solicit the feedback and collect all the information that we gather here this evening. And so we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end for any question and answer and wrap it up with contact information going forward. So I once again want to thank everyone who's online this evening. Thank you for joining us. We've had some thorough discussions in the past year, and so I'm looking forward to having some more this evening. So I want to give a little bit of background here on the workshop purpose. The purpose of these workshops is to share and collect information from the public on their river recreation experience, identifying some of the current trends and challenges for river recreation management in Montana. All this information collected will guide and inform the River Recreation Advisory Council. Now, the River Recreation Advisory Council, the purpose of this council is to develop a portfolio of ideas and a set of recommendations to the department for future considerations of river recreation management. We'll get a little bit more into the process of the RRAC in the next slide. The overall focus and scope of this process is extends to the department lands, Class 1 waters, and similar rivers that provide for recreation opportunities across Montana and under the authority of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. This includes recreation use on and along these waterways, including fishing access sites, which are managed by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. The first kind of initial stage of this process in the public engagement throughout this process, we established and sent out recruitment for the RRAC, the RAC, in July 2nd. Applications were open through August 2nd. Those applications and those who applied are currently in review. We have not confirmed those members as of yet. So that was open and now closed. We're at the stage now where we're going through 3 virtual scoping workshops, one of which you're a part of tonight. We will have an additional river recreation survey that will be accessible through the web page that will broaden our ability to get some public input and provide that to the RRAC. So a combination of the information gathered here at these workshops will be compiled, as well as the River Recreation Survey, which information and responses there will be compiled as kind of supplemental material to help guide the River Recreation Advisory Council. Phase 2 will be the convening of the RAC. Once we announce, we'll convene those RAC members mid-October, so around October 16th to 18th, they'll meet in person, go through a process of formulating a set of recommendations in that portfolio we discussed in the previous slide. The third phase of this process will be for the RAC to provide their final recommendations and allow for public comment. So the RAC will present those final recommendations at some point in mid-November. It's kind of the scheduled timeline there, with public comment and final recommendations being provided to the department by mid-December. So a little bit about the legislative and regulatory framework with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. The FWP Commission regulates recreational use on public waterways under broad authority, balancing public access, opportunity, and resource protection. You can see a list of some of the statutory authority as well as some of the rulemaking for department authority listed here below. There are links available that will be added to the chat and as I'm discussing, so feel free to kind of bookmark those, open those as you see fit. Each of these rules and kind of broad authority guide our river recreation management for the department throughout the state. Each of these have kind of some specific pieces to them, and so we'll get a little bit into how some of those are used, some of the rivers across the state a little later on in this introduction portion of the meeting. So to give you a kind of broad overview of what kind of the lay of the land is across Montana in terms of river recreation and kind of the access points. So you can think about river recreation as, not only on the river, but also these access points. The brown circle dots here on the map are Fish, Wildlife, and Parks FAS sites. So these are fishing access sites across the entirety of the state. Each of those are what we manage. There are other agencies that also manage sites along the riverways as well. And you can see some of the larger number are these upside down blue triangles, which are BLM sites. There's also an intermix of Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service sites, Bureau of Reclamation, and a couple other agencies throughout the state. And so just wanted to kind of give you a broad overview of kind of what that looks like, what the lay of the land is when you're starting to think about an entirety of the state and the management of river recreation across the entirety of the state. So a little bit background on river recreation here in Montana. We have over about 338 sites here in Montana for fishing access sites. The majority of those became established in the 60s and 70s. About 1985, the Montana Stream Access Law went in place. This allowed for public use of the waters for specifically water-based recreation, so allowing recreation to occur below the high water mark. So in 2004, statewide river recreation rules were adopted by the commission. These help guide the department on what rules are in place for managing rivers, and that's across the entirety of the state. In 2016, and kind of throughout this entirety of this time, we collect information and data at these FASs. In 2016, we started to see a change in trends. So prior to that, as well as an increase in use, some of these diverse activities in identifying the equitable opportunity of usage across these sites. And so we started to initially these FAS sites were meant for angling, but we're starting to see a large number and diverse number of uses that don't necessarily aren't related to fishing. And so starting to see these non-angling, non-fishing activities occurring at these FASs. In developing kind of this management approach, these statewide river recreation rules directed the development of specific management plans and regulations for rivers and access sites. And so there are examples, and we'll get into a couple of those later on in the presentation. But there are 7 rivers/sections in Montana that have some level of special use rules or permitting in place. And so not every river across the state has a permitting or special kind of rules in place, but there are about 7 of those across the state within FWP's authority. And so here's a map here, an example of what those rivers are. You can see any of the orange, kind of purple or green are special rules or permitting that are put in place. We also identified here the wild and scenic rivers that are federally managed by U.S. Forest Service that are highlighted in purple, in the dark purple. And so this is just to kind of give you an idea of kind of the range of management that can occur across the state, different special rules, different permitting processes. These are commercial permits that are either not limited or limited to some extent, or there is a limit of public and commercial permitting occurring. And as I kind of move through these slides and kind of throughout the presentation as well, we will have plenty of time near the end of the presentation to ask questions. There is the ability to comment or use the chat to reach out to the panelists here directly. So if you ever have a question, you'll see all those links, but you can feel free to respond and ask questions there. As we get a little later on this presentation, feel free to raise your hand. We'll be tracking the raise your hand and unmute you to be able to speak. So as we kind of move along, feel free to ask questions and provide some comment. So a little bit about river recreation management today. We use kind of a variety of different methods to manage rivers across the state. In ways we can increase staff presence, enforcement, we do data collection, we provide user education, so that might be in the way of signage or maps or online material that allows river recreationists to gather and collect information on how they're recreating across Montana rivers. We also have permitting systems and licenses in place. And a few examples of that was fishing access site permits, commercial use permits, as well as conservation licenses and fishing licenses. In addition to that, we work with other groups, we work with partners in coordinating and collaborating across agencies, other entities, and private landowners. And the examples of that would be private landowner agreements, other collaborative groups and processes that help us identify challenges, issues, and some solutions to river recreation management. We also have some specific river management plans in place. Examples of that are the Smith and the Blackfoot, and we'll dive a little bit more into those. We do not have river management plans for every river, but those are examples of specific management plans for certain sections and rivers. We also have a FWP Montana River Recreation Planning Manual. This helps guide decision-making and lines out a process for how we plan for managing river recreation across the state. And then finally, we use a variety of these methods in data collection and monitoring to kind of help guide these decisions. There's fisheries-related data, angling pressure surveys, and creel surveys. We do collect, as I mentioned before, permitting and licensing information. We also have the ability to collect information on commercial use and reporting data. So floater logs are an example of that. In certain cases, we also have camera and vehicle counter data where in place. We also do some in-person surveys in certain areas across the state, although not comprehensive. And then in addition to that, we have the public comment and other river recreation surveys that are implemented and deployed across the state, although not comprehensive as well. And so that's kind of a specific river or section. And so these are all examples of kind of what management at river recreation management today looks like from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, what we have in our kind of toolkit to be able to address challenges, identify some of these solutions. And I'm going to show you a quick video here, just kind of helps you kind of encapsulate a little bit of what your experience here in Montana is on river recreation. I think it's a wonderful video to kind of build out some of the emotion and your experience as we build into soliciting some of your input.
Montana is home to some of the most diverse and renowned rivers on Earth. Rivers and streams write the story of Montana, from the Badlands of the Missouri Breaks to the towering cliffs of the Smith, the forested banks and mountainous backdrop of the Blackfoot, and crystal clear waters of the Flathead, rich with biodiversity, sanctuaries for wildlife, and opportunities for recreation. A storied history of native culture, prospectors, and explorers evolved to legendary fly fishing, floating, adventure, and excitement. Serene flat water, blue ribbon trout streams, deep canyons, and raging whitewater attract visitors from across the world. Lifelong memories are made here. Camaraderie with friends, the thrill of adventure, and spectacular scenery rejuvenate the soul. Your actions to help preserve our majestic rivers will be rewarded with an unforgettable experience in the last best place.
So as you watch that video, I hope that helps kind of bring you into some of the aspects of your river recreation experience. Helps you kind of think about how broad of a spectrum and availability of recreation experiences that you can have around all the different types of river systems across Montana. It's a helpful way to kind of frame this broader perspective of river recreation management across the entirety of the state, which is kind of where we're diving into is a larger understanding what that river recreation experience is across the entire state of Montana and looking to manage that space. And so we'll have a few examples here of how we manage those spaces specific to a few rivers, what that spectrum kind of looks like in terms of management. We'll kind of start with the Smith River, this kind of heavier load on management here. We'll dive a little bit into the Blackfoot River as well as the Missouri River. And so I'll invite Colin Moss to present here a little bit on the Smith River.
Thank you, Liam, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for number 3 of our 3 workshops. As Liam mentioned, my name is Colin Moss. I'm a recreation manager. I'm based out of Region 4, which is in Great Falls, Montana. I do manage the Smith River, and I also manage another park called Sluice Box State Park. One thing to remember about the Smith River, all the specific rules and restrictions on use limits for the Smith River was really a progression of actions that occurred over several years, actually a couple decades. And some of the more influential things that occurred were in the 1980s. And in 1986, the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks hired a contractor to do what was basically called the Smith River Study, and that's what it was entitled. And it was just a study on data that it had been collected over previous years in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And essentially what that study did was offered some future management recommendations to the department. And then 2 years later, in 1988, the very first Smith River Management Plan was drafted. And many of those recommendations, in fact, most of those recommendations from the 86 Smith River study were adopted. And then a year later, the department introduced a bill into the 1989 legislature, and it was titled the Smith River Management Act. And that was one of the recommendations that was also born out of that 86 study. The reason being is that it gave Fish, Wildlife, and Parks just a little more teeth, a little more authority specific to the Smith River to enact specific rules and regulations. So the purpose and intent was to provide continued recreational and commercial use and enjoyment of the Smith River waterway, consistent with its capacity. Seek ways to minimize conflicts between users and private landowners. And then thirdly, to protect the integrity of the river's water and canyon resources for future generations. This Management Act is applicable to the Camp Baker Put-in all the way to the confluence with the Missouri River. It also gave the department some specific management responsibilities and a plan. And so a little more specifically, it directed the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to allow the continuation of compatible existing recreational and public land uses. Also to maintain the opportunity to enjoy the natural scenic beauty and solitude. And thirdly, to conserve the fish, wildlife, scientific, and recreational values of the canyon. Again, it gave specific rulemaking authority to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And then it also directed the department on where and how they would allocate user fees, specifically in what's called the Corridor Enhancement Account. And so you can kind of think of it in two ways. There's kind of a big bubble and a small bubble. And the big bubble is mainly for operations of the Smith River day-to-day operations, and then the smaller bubble was more earmarked for statutory specific uses. Next slide, please. And so during the 1990s, after passage of the Smith River Management Act, there was a progression of some lesser restrictive actions to more restrictive actions that were taken on the river up until our present day. And so present day restrictions on the Smith River, it's, for those of you that are familiar, it's a random lottery drawing, and that's for private individuals only. Beginning this year, there were two new rules that were implemented. Non-residents were limited to 20% of the available permits. And then you're also able to purchase one bonus point per year. It's limited to 9 launches per day, and that's both for private and outfitted groups. Maximum of 15 people per group between private and outfitted. And then the commercial outfitters, they're capped at 73 launches per year, and they operate off of a permanent launch calendar. And then they're allowed two of the 9 launches on Sundays and Wednesdays, and one launch on the other 5 days of the week. And then lastly, it's a 4-night maximum stay in the canyon per 4-night stay during our peak period, which is May 15th to July 15th. Next slide, please. As Liam mentioned earlier in his presentation, we collect data. So again, on the Smith River, there was a lot of data that was collected prior to the Smith River Management Act, and prior to the study, and prior to the very first management plan. And to this day, we still collect a lot of data, and a lot of that is for the very reasons that were just stated in the Smith River Management Act, to continue to kind of gauge capacity and where we're at with people's experience. And so the 3 main areas that we collect data from are obviously from the lottery drawing. So we collect that from our licensing division. And then the other 2 biggies are from our registration forms, where we actually register groups, and then our floater logs. And so the floater log is something that we give to each group, and then they fill out the questions on the floater log and turn that in at the end of their trip. That concludes my presentation on the Smith River. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, and we'll jump on into the Blackfoot River. Chrissy.
Good evening. Thanks, Liam. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. I'm here to talk tonight about the two regulatory mechanisms that are on the Blackfoot River for recreation purposes. Next slide, Liam. The Blackfoot River is one of Western Montana's most popular rivers for recreation. It has a rich history of recreation that goes back to crowding issues in the 1960s. This gave way to the very first regulatory mechanism on the Blackfoot River, which was the Blackfoot River Recreation Corridor Agreement. It's a agreement that was not put into rule until 2015, but it was an agreement among private landowners and also agencies and other landowners along the river that there would be some rules when it came to recreation in that corridor. The first of those is no glass is allowed in the river recreation corridor. Second being you can only camp in designated areas. FWP has since put in 8 float-in campsites to allow for that same experience. You also can't have fires in the recreation corridor unless they're in a fire pan. And we also are requiring fire blankets as well. And the recreation corridor automatically renews each year. And we have a meeting annually to discuss issues that are coming up in the area. We also have a special recreation permit, and I'll get into that in more detail in the next slide. Just for some background, there's 27 FASs in the Blackfoot drainage. There's 10 that are campgrounds and then 8 floating campsites. Next slide, please. Our special recreation permit works in hand with the 2010 management plan that is on the Blackfoot River. The 2010 management plan breaks the river up into reaches based on experiences that we think the public would like to enjoy in those areas. There are also group size limits in the reaches. And then the special recreation permit is required for commercial and organized group activities on the Blackfoot. It's basically a permit that allows you, if you have, as long as you have insurance that lists both the department and the Bureau of Land Management, who is our partner in this permit system. They both have to be listed on insurance. If you're offering fishing, you need to have an outfitter's license. And then there's a 3% a gross revenue that goes back to the department and the BLM, which requires $115 minimum payment for the permit program. The permit program does not have any use limits. It does not have a cap. People can apply today and get one, as long as they satisfy the requirements I spoke of earlier. And so really the special recreation permit has one really big advantage, and that is the data that is collected through reports that are given to us by those that hold the permits. Those reports tell us where they put in, where they took out, and how many clients they had on the river, along with staff and watercraft. This information is not available on any rivers that don't have special recreation permits on them. And it is incredibly valuable when it comes to making management decisions. Next slide, please. Monitoring and data collection have always been an aspect of Blackfoot management in every aspect. Going back to the 70s, they were collecting data, and we still do. We do surveys in person in conjunction with the BLM. We've had the same questions that we've been asking. So we have trend data back to 2006, but then we also have a section where we add new information, new questions where topic areas that we are needing information on at the current time. The surveys are really helpful. We don't get a ton of them, approximately 200 to 300. but they certainly don't hurt, and it is a way to keep track of what's going on the river. It also allows for interaction between our employees and the public. We also do camera monitoring in each reach, as I referred to in the management plan. We have a camera in each reach. The camera captures the watercraft from a distance. We are able to then count the watercraft and get a total number of commercial and non-commercial use. With using the SRP data, the special recreation permit data, just some math gives us a very good approximation of how much non-commercial use is on the river. Also would not be possible without the special recreation permit and the logs that go with it. We have traffic counters that also help as they get more sophisticated, they give us more information. And then I actually already talked about the SRP data for commercial use. Next slide, please. So what's changing on the Blackfoot River from what we see is the diversification of use. We're going from a population of mostly angling to angling and scenic floats, about half and half now. That number of scenic keeps climbing. We're also seeing a diversification of watercraft type on the Blackfoot. We saw a really big surge in use around COVID. Some areas with experiencing even an 80% increase in use. But since then, we continue to monitor and those numbers have plateaued. They're still higher than they've ever been, but they're not on the increase any longer. We're still collecting data and we're working on analyzing our 2024 information. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chrissy, and we'll move along to the Missouri River, Cannon Colgrove.
Thank you. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance tonight and your participation in tonight's meeting and throughout this River Rec process. My name is Cannon Colgrove. I am a recreation manager in Region 4. I primarily manage the fishing access site program across the region and work out of the Great Falls office, which includes the Missouri River section from Holter Dam down to Cascade. In this section of river, we have 16 public access sites. One of these is a Bureau of Land Management site, and the remaining 15 are Fish, Wildlife, and Parks fishing access sites, with 10 of these offering camping. Next slide, please. What's different about the Missouri River compared to the Blackfoot River and Smith River is that the Missouri River does not issue any permits for recreation use or commercial use of the river. And there's no allocation on the Missouri River. So there's no permitting by the department for this river, at least in this stretch, Holter Dam downstream to Cascade. Next slide. I just wanted to highlight two unique things to the Missouri River. The first being a program that the department offers called the Private Lands Fishing Access Program. And what these are agreements with private landowners to allow public access to the river. The department compensates private landowners who are interested in this program to provide public access to the river for fishing. And on the Missouri River, we have a landowner who offers 550 acres to approximately 6 river miles from about Holter Dam down to Craig for the public to access the river through private land. Next slide. I also wanted to highlight that the Missouri River does not have a river management plan, unlike the Blackfoot River and Smith River. However, we do have a partner with Northwestern Energy. Northwestern Energy prepares a Missouri Madison Comprehensive Recreation Plan, which fulfills their Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license to operate the 9 hydropower developments on the Missouri and Madison rivers in Montana. What this plan does not do is set public policy. It does not create requirements for managers to follow or implement. However, this plan does facilitate collaboration and communication among the various government entities that have management jurisdiction along the Missouri River, which includes Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. The plan provides the public and stakeholders with recreation visitation data that the department otherwise doesn't collect. It provides visitor use survey information, which Northwestern Energy collects. It guides funding for recreation projects along the Missouri River, which includes at our fishing access sites, and it outlines resource and recreation site concerns along the corridor. You can learn more about this comprehensive recreation plan, or you can see the data and survey information that Northwestern Energy collects by the website northwesternenergy.com/recreation. Thanks, Liam. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Colin, Chrissy, and Cannon. So hopefully that kind of gives everyone here online kind of a broad spectrum of understanding how we deploy some of the management practices across the entirety of the state, what that spectrum looks like, the different types of methods we use, and the different types of kind of permitting systems and tools that we have in our tool belt to kind of address some of the challenges and address some of this and deploy some of the solutions around river recreation management across the state. And that's just 3 river systems. Obviously, we have a variety throughout the entirety of the state with different each kind of river system, each reach being a bit unique. And so hopefully as you start to kind of think about the broad range of river recreation across the entirety of the state and what that means, we're going to kind of dive a little bit into where we are soliciting your feedback and your input. And so I'd like you to frame it, from that broad statewide level. We will be using Menti or Mentimeter, or Menti for short. This is a software that allows us to collect kind of live information and responses while you're attending. These responses are anonymous, so they're not tied to anybody's, your name or anything won't come up. As mentioned, these responses will be recorded and summarized into a report. So be sure to keep these responses positive and concise, focused on the prompt at hand. As I mentioned, as we kind of roll through these questions, feel free to raise your hand if you wish to speak. Host will unmute participants and ask you to speak once we get you unmuted. As I mentioned previously as well, the scope here that we're kind of picturing is these Class 1 waters and similar rivers with the capacity of river recreation use. And so those that you're able to kind of, either wade and angle, move along, any floating rivers. So kind of these larger river systems. And as mentioned previously as well, these comments will not be recorded as formal public comment at this time, but we do appreciate and really ask that you bring up some of these discussion points and bring in some of the dialogue here this evening. And so we'll kind of dive in to our first question just to get you a little bit familiarized. But first, here are some of the instructions. So if you go to www.menti.com, you can enter the code 51524524. That'll get you kind of linked into the presentation itself. You can also use the QR code if you have your phone on you and you want to use the QR code, it'll take you right to this screen. Throughout the rest of the presentation here and the questions, the top piece there in the white, the join at menti.com with the code will be there for the moving forward. And so if you ever do get kicked off or you need to get back in, feel free to use this code here at the top. And so I'll give a minute here as people kind of log in and get into the Menti. I did see that we had one question here or comment asking a little bit about the Gallatin River system. Thinking about some of these rivers that don't have kind of a program in place for collecting information. I believe this came from Jack. Jack, do you want to provide any further clarification on that question? And I think we can maybe unmute you if you'd like to.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, hi, Jack McGuire, Big Sky. Gallatin River is one of the most popular rivers in the state of Montana, supposed to be managed by the Gallatin River Task Force. They don't have the personnel or the expertise. There hasn't been an accurate fish count on the Gallatin since 2014. All right, with all of the resources that are in the Big Sky community, the Big Sky Chamber of Commerce continuously promotes the Gallatin as a blue ribbon fishery. No one knows what the fish count is or the size of the fish in the Gallatin. And Fish and Wildlife says they don't have the resources. So why can't some organization be developed or a foundation like the Henry's Fork to do something on a proactive basis on the Gallatin? Because we don't need any more studies. We've been studying the Gallatin to death, and it's only deteriorating year after year after year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, I appreciate you providing that comment and a little more specifics on your thoughts there, and thinking about, a river system, the Gallatin specifically there. And we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of the questions here. You'll be able to kind of tease out some of those issues and challenges here. And so as we move through these questions, you'll be able to provide that input. Please keep that in mind. So appreciate that, Jack. Our first question here is just kind of an intro question, just to allow you to get comfortable with how we're using Menti. And so the first question here is, what river recreation activities do you participate in? These first few questions that we'll have coming up will allow for multiple response, so feel free to plug in as many responses as you see fit. I know there's a variety of recreation activities that you can participate in, and don't feel limited by this. And so we want to get a broad idea of what all these activities are that are occurring, this diversification of activities across the entirety of the rivers across the entirety of the state. And as you can see, this is set up in a word bubble kind of situation. And so those responses that are more common are going to be larger font. So more of the responses that we get will be larger. Some of those less response frequency will be kind of smaller, but still providing for kind of this word bubble. And as I mentioned, thinking about not just the river recreation on the river, but as well as along the river, what type of activities are you engaging with? I think this is helpful in just trying to frame kind of, as we mentioned, this diversification of recreation across the river systems. What needs to be recognized in that diversification and understanding the experience. I'll give about 30 more seconds to add in a few more so you kind of start to think about it. And as I mentioned, we'll be able to provide, do some more questions and answers as we get near the end of these questions. We'll look to be able to answer some of those a little more in depth. We'll kind of move through these questions here, just to make sure we can get through and get all your input. So we'll go ahead and move on to this next one. So what aspects of the river recreation experience do you enjoy the most? So I want you to think about a little bit of, you may think about that video that was shown, kind of this opportunity spectrum of what's available for river recreation, and what is it about, not just that activity, but what is it that is enjoyable? And if there's anyone who'd like to expand, feel free to raise your hand, expand on what is it about this experience? What is it that you enjoy the most? Why does it mean that to you? Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to kind of expand on that.
Liam, I just need to jump in here. We're getting a message from one of the attendees and saying that we're ignoring him. We're not ignoring you. We're going to take questions at the end. Right now, we want to focus on the questions that you see on your screen. And if you want to unmute yourself and talk about these questions right now as we go through them, there will be plenty of time at the end to cover additional questions. I also want to stress what Liam said at the beginning. This River Rec Advisory Council is focused on really social issues, potential crowding, crowding issues. We don't have, I don't believe, any fish biologists on. We're not going to be talking about fish biology tonight. We're really focused on the social aspects of river recreation. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. But if you have questions at the end, we will have hopefully a good, robust conversation at the end and talk about it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. And yeah, we'll be able to kind of tease out a bit more of those conversations near the end. Kind of focusing right now just on these questions that are being presented here through Menti, and then we can dive a little bit more into any specific questions kind of near the end of the meeting here. And so thinking about those enjoyable experiences, we're getting number of responses. Solitude's a big piece to that. We've seen that in a number of workshops, kind of that experience around being able to get out into nature, and a kind of solitude, environment where not necessarily around others, something that's quiet, being on the river, on the water itself, it's a very significant piece to that. And so this is kind of capturing that broad range of what it means to enjoy the river recreation experience. So I'll give about 10 more seconds here to include any last thoughts to include. So similar to this question around the positive kind of aspects, we want to kind of tease out what aspects of river recreation experience do you enjoy the least. So kind of touched on what it is. Then we go hand in hand, and as you're starting to think about, what was enjoyable and what really kind of impacts your experience. What's not enjoyable when you're headed out to the river to recreate. And once again, I really encourage you, as you're kind of inputting these responses, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to expand on some of these thoughts or what you're seeing on the screen is what's becoming kind of more frequent or what the responses are. If you have any comments on that, please do raise your hand and we'll unmute you to speak. Some poor etiquette certainly coming up. Lack of etiquette's on there as well. Some of those physical pieces, lack of parking, some access points and crowds. Some of the management pieces as well. Some of those natural kind of ecological challenges are showing up a little bit here. Some of those social aspects as well. So the poor etiquette, seeing that's very popular here in these responses. And if anyone's having any issues with Menti or Mentimeter, please do reach out to us. Hopefully we can, as I mentioned, the code is there at the top. So if you ever do get kicked out, you can just kind of re-enter through menti.com using that code at the top. I'll give about 10 more seconds here to add any last responses. Love seeing this broad range of what some of these kind of challenges are, what's least enjoyable. Could start to see a very large spectrum. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question here. This question here is we're trying to tease out a little bit of what types of information is useful and necessary to engage in river recreation activities. Trying to gauge a little bit about what type of information, what is that type of information that's needed for you to head out onto the river. Whether that's, on an annual basis or on a daily basis, what is it that you need to be able to kind of enjoy your river recreation experience? What is it that you already do? Maybe it's something that's already being provided, or is there types of information that you need? And once again, I encourage you to raise your hand if you'd like to dive a little bit deeper into why your responses are or what they are. Maybe start a little bit of dialogue around some of the types of information that you find useful and necessary. So a lot of information about that flow data, some of those CFS flows, what's out there. See some unique responses here around hazards and obstructions. Parking availability and some information around permits, rules and regs. Great. This is really helpful in collecting all this, and I'll give about 10 more seconds again here to respond and add any more responses. And I'm going to go ahead and head to the next question here. So now we thought about a little bit about what types of information that's useful for you to enjoy kind of that river recreation experience. We kind of want to know what types of channels, what channels are the best for reaching river recreation with this type of information. You can start to see some of those responses popping up here. What are the ones that you use currently? What are some of the ones that might be, helpful moving forward? What are these channels that would be helpful for you as a river recreationist?
And while you guys are answering that, I'll just make another comment here that all this information, like Liam said at the beginning, and you might have missed it if you jumped on here late, will be provided to the River Recreation Advisory Council. So this is just some of the information that we wanted to be able to collect from the public, because you guys are out there using the sites, using the rivers, recreating on the rivers in a variety of different ways. So we really wanted to make sure that we heard from you. We could take our best guess at a lot of these things and probably get pretty close, but we really wanted this public participation. So the advisory council members would be able to hear directly from the public on what mattered to you guys. And these were just some of the questions. We're going to get into more meatier questions, especially our last two questions, but all this stuff will be used by them to develop their recommendations to the department. So we really appreciate you participating in this, and hopefully you'll see the relevance as we continue on with these questions.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, and I think really appreciate all the thoughtfulness. You see some really unique recommendations here, some of those channels, some that we haven't heard really in the past. So I appreciate kind of thinking about really brainstorming here what would be helpful for you. What are these channels? So give you about 10 more seconds to add any final responses here, and we can move along to the next question. Hopefully this kind of helps kind of crowdsource some ideas as you're working, kind of seeing these visuals of kind of the word bubbles show up might trigger some other thoughts as well of yours as you move through. All right, we'll move along to the next question here. And so thinking about kind of those in a similar line, kind of track of thought here. Now are there any specific kind of emerging trends or technologies that you think could benefit river recreation management? So some of you may be very involved in river recreation, what your involvement is. You might be out there every day. And so are there other, states, are there other experiences you've had that allow you that you've noticed other trends, other technologies that might help in kind of the management of these rivers, especially from a state level, when we're looking at it, the entirety of a state system and how to manage rivers? What are those technologies? What is, those emerging trends that might be helpful for us as a department to be aware of, some opportunities there? Once again, another plug here, if you do want to expand on any of these responses, thinking kind of about these emerging trends and technologies, maybe if you listed one here and you've seen it work in other capacities in other states, other areas, how was it working? Feel free to raise your hand and provide some clarification, kind of expand if we'd like to get some dialogue on, I see apps here, thinking about what types of apps those might be. Some of these, there's some other methods here around kind of data collection as well. Some additional tools around how we collect data, what types of data. Some of these. There's a few examples here, it looks like as well, kind of at the access points. Some of these technologies and allow us to collect information and data at these access points. Some of the permitting and rules kind of information. As I mentioned, if you have any additional follow-up or comment about some of these responses here, please feel free to raise your hand. Once again, I'll give about 10 more seconds here to add any final responses. We can kind of keep moving on. As Deb mentioned, our last two questions that we'll have here for you this evening will be a little bit more unique in the way that we'll ask them. I'll give you the kind of instructions for those as we move along, but we want to make sure we get to those last couple questions. Those will be really helpful in kind of summarizing and building out kind of as you are moving through these questions, overall kind of assessment of river recreation. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question here. Hopefully everyone's got the opportunity here to include all your responses. Thinking about, do restrictions on river use impact your recreation experience? If so, how? And so trying to gauge a little bit about what, in general, what restrictions on river use and how they would impact your recreation experience. This could be an intention of a positive or negative, but if there are restrictions on a certain section of river, or you're familiar with some that you've been on, how does that impact your experience? And as you'll see, this is an open-ended response, and so responses will be kind of presented here in columns, and I'll kind of scroll down as responses come in. This allows kind of more commentary in terms of a statement in your response. And the rest of these questions going forward will be similar format, and so I'll kind of scroll down through as responses are put in, and you can see them coming up on the screen. You can see some comments about how permitting or restrictions would restrict your ability to recreate, some about how the experience is a positive, and what some of those restrictions or limitations might be. Once again, if anyone wants to expand on the responses here, feel free to raise your hand. Some of these comments really are diving into some of these technical aspects, some of these technical pieces around, the management, what those restrictions look like. I think it's helpful, thinking about that. What is in the toolkit, what's available for kind of restrictions, or, what is available for managing these rivers across the state, and how, what is that broad brush of restrictions and that management tools that are available, and how, thinking about if there was something in place, what is it, how is it impacting your experience? Consistent information, correct information. Cool. I'll give about 10, 15 more seconds here to add any other responses. As I mentioned, these will kind of show up similar to how this question, the next couple of questions will be similar kind of format. Right. I'm going to go ahead and head on to this next question. Got one more response here. Appreciate that. So now we're kind of thinking about some of those aspects of how can management address conflicting interests between recreational users. So we're starting to, what you have put on your kind of social impact hat here of thinking about some of the social issues between, recreation users along and within the river. How can management kind of address these conflicting issues? See some responses coming in around education and outreach. Are there other approaches that you think would be beneficial for management, fish, wildlife, and parks, other agencies to understand kind of what these conflicting issues are and what is kind of the best way to manage those? Once again, another plug here is you kind of input your responses. Feel free to raise your hand, expand on any of these responses here or what you're seeing on the screen. If we'd like to kind of start a dialogue within this group, it's helpful to kind of tease out, some of these responses and be able to kind of learn together here as well. So a lot of responses here around education, messaging, being able to provide education. Some responses here as well around rules and regulations. Now I'll kind of scroll up and down here, just make sure everyone can see some of these responses. We have about 10, 15 more seconds here. Any last second responses that want to be included? We'll move along to the next question. All right, so we're going to dive into one of our bigger topic questions here this evening. When you're kind of thinking about river recreation management, we've had some pretty specific questions around some of these tools, some of these aspects around your river recreation experience. And now we want to know, what is the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana? This is the format here for this question set up a little bit uniquely. As responses kind of come in, we will then be able to switch over to the voting stage. And so as responses come in, we'll allow everyone to kind of respond. And then once we have as many of the responses available, then we'll move into kind of like a voting page, and that you'll be able to vote up to 3 times on responses that you feel also might be the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana. And we'll kind of be able to identify kind of a crowdsourced way. We'll review the results and see kind of where everyone within this group is identifying the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana. And when we get to the voting page, you'll be able to see all of these responses and select the ones that you think are the biggest challenge. about 15 more seconds here. Add any final responses and we'll transition over to the voting stage here, and which point you'll have 3 votes. You can vote on, there'll be separate challenges. And then we can take some time there, and then we'll take a look at the results, at which point it'd be helpful if anyone wants to raise their hand, have further discussion once we get to that results page. Fantastic. We'll go ahead and enter into this voting stage here. Feel free to make your selections on what is the biggest challenge for river recreation management in Montana.
And while we're waiting for people to vote, I'll just echo what Liam said. If you guys really want to have an actual conversation around these topics, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you, and you'll be able to talk through maybe why you voted the way you did, or why you added one of those challenges that you did. And if not, like I said, we'll take some questions at the end. I think, what do we have, one more question, Liam? Yeah, and then we'll have time for some questions at the end.
Eric, you should be able to take yourself off of mute.
Thank you. I had a discussion just for general topic. Do you want me to ask that now, or do you want to wait for general discussion?
Thanks, Eric. If the question, I guess, or the comment here is around the biggest challenge and what this question, we can kind of take that now, or if it's just a general question, we can maybe hold off until the end.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll hold off. It's just a question around restrictions and that, so I'll ask it later. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you. I want to make sure everyone's getting the opportunity here to vote. I see got about 13 people voted so far. We'll give about 30 more seconds here to make sure we can give everyone the opportunity to kind of provide their votes. Hopefully everyone's had the chance here to vote, and we're gonna move along here to the results. And I'll kind of scroll through each of these. You can see where the most popular response or votes were, which is overcrowding and affecting user experience. Number of votes here for climate change. Additionally, tied there is a lack of etiquette and respect for fellow users, being my use is more important than yours. You see some of these votes as well for similar kind of challenges. So overcrowding here, overcrowding affecting user experience. I'll kind of scroll through this, and as I mentioned, this is a good time to kind of see as we see where these results are, what's more popular, and kind of these responses and the crowdsourcing information we're kind of gathering here. Here's a group. What we see is kind of that biggest challenge. Singular votes down here. Okay, scrolling back up here to the top, and thinking about, climate change, some of these overcrowding aspects, this etiquette piece, some of those social science, social issues. Is there anyone who would kind of like to expand on kind of what we're seeing here for results? As I mentioned, we'll have one more question here, and then we can kind of open up the floor with any general Q&A questions. So if we don't have any kind of comments or questions here, we'll go ahead and move along to the next question. Now that we've kind of thought about some of those biggest challenges affecting river recreation management here in Montana, kind of want to think a little more solutions based. What is the long-term goal for river recreation management in Montana? What would be that primary goal that you think would be really helpful in identifying and setting out for river recreation management here in Montana? So now we've kind of thought about a lot of these pieces, these kind of technical pieces around, the information that's needed, the information that's available, some of these channels, thinking about some of those big challenges. What is it around goal-wise that you think would be helpful in identifying moving forward with river recreation management? And similar to the last question, this will be set up where we'll be able to kind of go into a voting stage and then see those results. And we see About 12 responses here. I want to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to kind of plug in their long-term goal. We'll give about 30 more seconds and we can move along to the voting stage here. Couple responses here referring to the environment, kind of those ecological pieces. Some responses here as well about kind of the equity of use. Great. I'm going to go ahead and move into the voting stage here. Go ahead and start the voting here and we'll flip onto the results. And then I know we're running up to about 7:30, but certainly be here to make sure we get to that Q&A piece as well. And hopefully some dialogue or further discussion once we get to the results page here on this question. About 30 more seconds here for anyone to provide their votes. We can move along to the results page. And as I mentioned, thinking about this long-term goal, as we look at some of these results here within this group, this is our third workshop, so we've been collecting this information throughout 3 workshops. So it's been really helpful to kind of get a broad understanding of, what are some of these long-term goals? What are some of these challenges that we'll be able to kind of compile and present to the River Recreation Advisory Committee. So it looks like we've got most of the votes in. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the results page here. See, we've got 2 kind of top popular votes here. Responses: the biological health of aquatic resources, thinking about that ecological piece of river recreation management here in Montana, and then the managing for impact on the resource while allowing for recreational use. So some of that long-term goal of balancing recreational use and the resource itself. Both of those top responses voting wise, kind of alluding to that biological and ecological aspect of the resource itself. You can see that another top vote here is the equitable distribution. So kind of the social challenge of being able to identify, the equitable use of these rivers while being adaptive. Preserving the water levels. Kind of scroll through a few more of these responses. I know we're just getting here to 7:30, but we want to make sure we leave some time if we want to discuss this question here. We can kind of include that in the Q&A portion of our workshop this evening. Just some simple instructions similar to what I've requested throughout the meeting and the workshop. If you do have questions, I know we have a few to get back to that were asked a little earlier on. Once again, we'll unmute you and just hope that we can keep these questions, keep them related to the presented material and kind of what topics were discussed. And as mentioned, this workshop is recorded, so keeping your comments positive. So I think we had Eric had a question that we wanted to get back to, and I believe we had one earlier as well. So we'll make sure we capture all that.
Thank you, Liam. And thank you, Deb. Appreciate you guys putting this on and giving the opportunity for people to comment. I just had a comment. Obviously, if you put together a committee and you're hosting these, you're considering changes. And I live close to the Blackfoot River and the Alberton Gorge, and I'm well aware of the increased use. I've lived here all my life. And for that reason, because I like to use those rivers. And I think if we look at another place where usage had to come into question was Glacier Park. And I wonder, like, if you're thinking of changes, I would just caution, like, if we've seen what's happened up there, there's a lot of people that live and have lived there all their lives to go into Glacier. And they comment that now I can't go to Glacier. It would be very interesting for me if I wanted to do an evening float with my family, that all of a sudden I couldn't go on the Blackfoot. Now I'm biased. I live here and I want to be able to recreate on the local rivers, but I think it's interesting, and maybe we can learn from some of these other places like Glacier of when they put restrictions in that maybe it didn't have the desired effect. You're not facing an easy problem, so I appreciate that, but I appreciate taking our comments and kind of listening to this and trying to figure out a way that, you know, if it's super crowded, I've seen some days on the gorge where it's not good. It's not an experience that maybe people wanted. So there has to be some change, but at the same time, it's like there are people that live in these communities that's how they want to spend their evening or their Saturday. And I see that with the Smith River and the permit system and limiting some folks. And I'm hoping that would also be in consideration with people that live near and support these local resources. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. I appreciate, that perspective there. And if there's any follow-up kind of comments or kind of discussion, dialogue around, that conversation around, what is equitable, thinking about some of these tools that were presented, some of these management practices we have in place. There are unique management practices and deployments of that management on specific rivers throughout the state. And so they are very unique, and kind of get to some of that questions Eric's kind of asking, when does it get deployed? When does it get implemented? To what extent is that? I think these are all really tough questions. And so hopefully, part of this is getting that feedback, that input from you guys, and then being able to, share that as kind of supplemental material and information for the RAC, to kind of develop some of these recommendations.
I see a question in the chat from Jack McGuire. And he says, wild trout versus stocking fish, will it increase the experience for folks visiting Montana for the first time? Well, I think that obviously that's not something I can answer for the folks visiting Montana for the first time. I think there are some people that just want to catch any fish, and I think there are people out there that want to catch, a native wild fish. So I don't know that any of us could answer that question, but that's something that obviously the council might have to consider moving forward. But thank you for that, Jack.
Yeah, appreciate. I see Jack has, a couple comments here, and thinking about just, that stocking of kind of fish and, the fishery itself and what that looks like, I think is is certainly a piece of, part of this broad understanding around river recreation. Angling is one piece of that. And we start, how important that is for anglers and to be able to, enjoy. We saw in the first question we had, fishing's a huge piece of, the river recreation experience, and having healthy fisheries out there is really important. And so we of course have a division, a fisheries division with FWP that focuses a lot on the fisheries and the health and the ecological aspects. And here at POR, diving a little bit more into kind of the social aspects, some of those challenges. I think, working in collaboration, of course, with the other divisions to identify, what is that impact on those fisheries. Certainly, and what are some of those solutions to being able to support the fisheries is a key. So appreciate that.
Yeah, and I want to thank Eric for acknowledging that this isn't an easy. The set of recommendations coming from this council are going to be well thought out, and they're not easy decisions, right? I mean, by what Jack just asked about people experiencing either wild trout or just catching a fish, everybody values things differently. Everybody has different values, and trying to balance all that, not just with angling, but with floating, with wade fishing, with using boats, motorized versus non-motorized. Obviously, those are all different values that people hold, and this is going to be a difficult thing for folks to come together on. So thanks for acknowledging that, Eric. And it looks like we have a hand up with Ben.
Thank you for taking questions. Question for you all is, how does a RAC committee, what is the process for forming this RAC committee, i.e. what is the impetus for doing such committees? And in this case, what specifically was your trigger point to call this process? Thank you.
Sure, thanks for the question, Ben. So if you're aware of any of the bigger contentious issues that FWP has been dealing with over the past several years, we have really been engaging, I'm sorry, that's my neighbor's dog. We have been engaging the public more and more to help us manage the resources for the public. Like I said earlier, we can do the research and we can take our best guess at things, and we could probably really be close, but we really want to hear from the people that are impacted the most by this. So we put together a elk citizens advisory group a few years ago, and we just had a mule deer group as well. I'm not sure that there was any one thing that was the impetus for this group to be put together. If I had to pinpoint something, I would say that honestly, all the groups that we've had in the past, internal groups and partnering with external folks, we just haven't gotten there yet. We've been trying on the Madison, for instance, and we just haven't gotten there. And so we're just trying this new model, like we did with the elk working group and the mule deer work group, to have a citizens-based group with no FWP staff on it whatsoever. What we're doing is we're helping them by providing them information, but the set of recommendations will be strictly coming from the public. So your input and participating, virtually in their meeting in October as well. All this will come directly from the public, with really no involvement from us whatsoever, other than being their scribe. So I think we're just trying this new format. It's worked several times now with these other big, contentious issues and sensitive topics, and we're hoping it will work this time.
Thanks, Ben, and yeah, thanks, Deb. for providing that further clarification. And I know, yeah, we're a little over time, but still want to be able to provide the opportunity for any other questions here. I pulled up on the screen some of the links that were shared kind of throughout the workshop. So those should be available to you to reference as you need. Thank you, Amber, for putting those into the chat. You can also reach out to Deb or myself. Our emails are here on the page. If you have any further questions, kind of following up with this workshop, as I mentioned, this is a recorded workshop. It'll be posted on the RAC webpage. Kind of thinking going forward as we move along, identifying and convening the RAC into mid-October will be an opportunity for you to be involved continually going forward, as well as those final recommendations and public comment into November, kind of through with the goal of providing those final recommendations of from the RAC to the department in mid-December. So we'll also have a recreation kind of survey up and available. Kind of stay tuned for when that becomes available, open for about 2 or 3 weeks here in the next week or so. And so plenty of other opportunities kind of for this engagement of the public, collecting, soliciting some of the feedback and input we're getting, to really help kind of supplement and provide to the River Recreation Council information that, will be, from the public to the public, and just help guide them, in a direction that'll be productive and effective. So I'll leave maybe a minute here or so for any questions. And then otherwise we'll kind of wrap things up for the evening. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it. And yeah. A question in the chat here in regards to what percentage of this council will be represented by public versus commercial reps. We going kind of through this of the applications that we received around 27 applicants. We didn't set necessarily a percentage on public versus commercial reps. We found that diversity of kind of representation where someone's, a public user and a commercial user, that's kind of, those lines are blurred. And so we specifically looked into kind of the technical aspects, what kind of the resume of those applicants, their experience around river recreation management in the past, what they've been involved in the past, what they might be able to bring to the council, as well as primarily their ability and interest in working together. And so we're really, as a kind of contentious and challenging issue, and some challenging decisions to be made, we're really focused in on members that were willing to work together, kind of cooperate with each other to really identify and assess some of these challenges and provide some thorough recommendations.
Yeah, I will add to that. Like Liam said, we didn't set any qualifiers there. We did strive for 50-50. And that gets harder and harder when you start stratifying by all the different types of interests. So we, is commercial just fishing, or is it floating? If somebody, we wanted to make sure that we had representation from across the state as well. So as well as interest. So it was a difficult, we're still pouring through it, and it's difficult, but we're trying to keep it equitable as 50-50 as close as we can.
Thanks for the question, Sam. And I see we've got a question from Whitney as well. Is FWP, as part of this process, collecting best practices from other states and internationally? I guess kind of to answer that question, we do have FWP's information data collected, previous research projects, other partners that we've used, their information as well. And I think we'll be able to provide, all those materials to the RAC, thinking about kind of this overall process of best practices. We do have literature and information from other organizations, so American Rivers, and I know there's some other literature out there, as well as other management kind of templates around river recreation, through the River Management Society. And so each of those, pieces are a part of kind of supporting materials for this RAC, something that will be helpful for them to kind of decipher and use as a resource to make their decisions. And so we're certainly not limiting or staying away from, kind of these best practices. We certainly want to make sure that the RAC is aware of, all these resources available, and really want to make sure that they've, are aware of them and can kind of work with them to the extent that they need to work with it. So, yeah, kind of providing them with that tool, but not necessarily saying that you have to follow this, if that's helpful. Thank you for the question, Whitney. Give, about 30 more seconds here. If we have any other last minute comments or questions, feel free to raise your hand or add them into the chat.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for participating, and hope to see your names in the future at the RAC meeting virtually, as well as on the survey that we'll have out soon, to gather more information for the RAC to help them make their decisions. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.